Well, I don't know about you or how up you are on hip and trendy things, but have you ever heard of a TED Talk? TED Talks are one of my favorite things. It can be about almost anything. It can be someone's personal tragedy and how they've overcome so many things. It could be how somebody started a brewery. It could be a science thing or maybe something with the technology. Anyway, there's lots and lots of different talks, and I listen to a few of them, or a lot of them. And one that I heard a little while ago, this scientist was going around and she was talking about languages and how they actually affect our concepts in our own communities and in communities around us. And she talked about a tribe that they had studied, we'll say for argument's sake, in the Amazon. And this tribe, as they studied the language, had many, many, many different words for the color green. Now that might seem insignificant because we have lots of different colors for green, and I'm not an interior designer, so I'm not going to say the ones that we have, but I know that we have more than one word for green. But they had way more than that, like hundreds of different words for the color green. But interestingly enough, they only had one word for blue. Now you could think, what effect might this have on a community or on a society? So when the scientists were looking to study what effect it would have, they took all these different color swatches. On one page, it was all these different color greens. And the differences in these color swatches of greens was very minute. And the people of this tribe could tell the difference immediately in all of these greens. And then they did a color swatch of blues that had different gradients of blues on there, all different colors. And unless there was a major difference, this people could not tell the difference between these small differences in blue. They could not tell the difference in these colors. In fact, they didn't even have a perception of it. They just thought, oh, that's the same blue. And I find that fascinating how our concepts that surround us in our communities, in our homes, in our languages, actually affects our perception. Could you imagine not being able to see all these different color blues? Well, you might be able to see them, but you had no idea that there's tons of different colors of blues. It's something that we can't fathom. That's kind of what I think about when I listen to the gospel. Could you imagine back then being one of the disciples, and we give them a hard time, don't we? Especially in this trip, in this gospel, we love to say, oh, those disciples, ye of little faith, they didn't know how it was going to end, but we do, ha ha ha. But if you could imagine being a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, you've been watching boats go out your entire life and fish. You've seen many, many, many storms on the Sea of Galilee. You have seen the boats, the fishing boats or ships sink. You have seen people lost because of storms in the Sea of Galilee. Not some far-off place where you had never seen before, something that you saw every single day. And then Jesus comes along, and you've seen Jesus heal a leper, heal a paralytic. You've seen Jesus heal tons of people that are sick and heal somebody who was possessed by a demon. But you haven't seen anything like this. So you get on a boat, and there's a storm, and all of a sudden, you're terrified. You already know how this ends in your mind. It's either going to be very dangerous, and you're going to be terrified, or you're not going to make it back. And so they woke Jesus up, and Jesus stilled the water. Could you imagine, not only awe-inspiring, but like, when I say that you don't have any concept, they didn't have any concept that that was even possible. When we look in Corinthians at the epistle, we see Paul chastising the Corinthians, and we know why, right? The Corinthians, they didn't behave very well. They like to do their own thing, and Paul wrote, we have lots of his writings to the Corinthians many times, you got to behave. This is what you need to do. Open your heart to God's love. But they didn't have any concept, this massive, expansive concept of God's love. They created a wonderful community full of God's love, but in their minds it was still, oh, we could be separated because we make more money than this person, or we're disagreeing on what color carpet needs to go in the place where they're worshiping, or whatever it is. But the Corinthians, they got comfortable, and then they started bickering. And then Paul was like, no, no, no. Come back to me. Come back to God. Come back to Jesus and expand your hearts even more than you have before. Stop bickering. So when I hear all these things, I think to myself, what are the boundaries that we're experiencing that we don't even know? What are the boundaries that we're experiencing because maybe you grew up on John's Island and this is how everything lived, or wherever you grew up, right? You know, the upstate of South Carolina or whatever it might be. We saw in front of us, this is how lives are lived. This is how outcomes happen. These are the possible outcomes. This is all there is. And we have this box that fits differently for everyone in everyone's mind, but a box in your mind of how you think you see things are going to play out. And when does that imagination stop us from thinking of something even greater, even bigger than we can even imagine? How could we even imagine it? If we haven't even seen it, if we haven't experienced it, how can we even imagine beyond that? So last week, we had 2 wonderful days with the rural housing community from across the street. On Tuesday, they came over for our noon Eucharist and lunch, and we had a Juneteenth liturgy that was wonderful. And on Wednesday, we had a celebration of Juneteenth where they celebrated the volunteers for rural housing. And if you had said a year ago that we were going to be having those things happen here at St. John's, you might have been like, I've never seen anything like that happen. There's no way. But it did happen. And it was life-giving. It is life-giving and community building. You know, I told a different story in the 8 o'clock service since we're recording this one, because I don't want that on video. But I'll tell a similar story. I was going to an orientation at a job that I got, say, 12 years ago. And I wasn't the only one in this orientation. And I saw this tiny, shorter guy, maybe about 5'7", 5'8". And that's not short, I'm just saying shorter than me. And so at the end of the orientation, I kept raising my hand and asking questions because I like to get things nailed down. I want to know how things are going to work. And he kept cutting his eyes at me, giving me the dirtiest looks. And I was like, okay, we are never going to be friends. And that's cool because if he's going to cut his eyes at me like that, I'm good. And the first day of work, the first day of actual work, we went out for a drink afterwards to talk about how the day went. And we have been almost best friends for 12 years. You know, I don't know why I didn't put that limit there that said, well, that guy acted like X, Y, and Z, so I'm not going to be friends with him. Whatever reason, I didn't put that boundary there. What if we try to not put those boundaries on ourselves or our communities and say, this is exactly how it has to be, this is how we've seen it and experienced it, and this is what we want it to look like. Trust me, it's okay if you just label it with amazing amounts of love. That's an awesome vision. But know that we can't even imagine what that looks like until we get there. We are still figuring it out. We can't look in our past and say, you know, this perfect community that made everything work and everything was perfect the whole time. We don't have that in our past. What we do have, what we are blessed with, is feeling the love of God, knowing that God is in charge. The world isn't boxed in because we don't have enough concepts of what's possible, because God is what's possible and God is what's happening. And so today, as we move through the day and get ready for a wonderful week of VBS next week, may we be in awe and not put boundaries on what we think is possible. May we place our trust and our care and our love in God and in Jesus, knowing that God is with us, God is in control, and the things that we can experience are beyond anything that we could ever imagine. Amen.